The air inside L'Etoile was meticulously curated to smell of old money and new cuisine. It was a symphony of quiet, clinking silver, murmured conversations, and the distant, artistic sizzle from a kitchen run with military precision. Every detail, from the starched white tablecloths to the single, perfect orchid on each table, was a testament to the obsessive vision of its owner and maître d', Hélène Dubois. Hélène moved through her domain not like a manager, but like a conductor, ensuring every note of the evening's performance was flawless. Her eyes, sharp and quick, missed nothing. So, when the heavy oak door opened, admitting a gust of cool night air, and a man who was the antithesis of everything L'Etoile represented, her entire posture stiffened. He was large, broad-shouldered, and clad in worn, heavy leather. A road-worn vest adorned with patches that spoke of long miles and a fierce loyalty to something other than fine dining was stretched over a faded black t-shirt. His beard was thick, his hair was long, and a complex network of tattoos disappeared up his forearms and neck. He stood for a moment, his eyes adjusting to the dim, golden light, a quiet island of denim and leather in a sea of silk and cashmere. He didn't swagger. He didn't glower. He simply stood there, waiting. A young host, barely out of his teens, approached him with a look of terrified confusion. "Can I help you, sir?" the boy stammered. "Table for one," the man said. His voice was a low rumble, devoid of aggression, yet it seemed to absorb the ambient sound around it. Heads turned. A woman at a nearby table subtly shielded her pearls with her hand. Her companion, a man in a tailored suit, gave a theatrical sigh of disapproval. The judgment was silent, but it was as palpable as the scent of truffle oil in the air. This was a place of delicate sensibilities, and this man was a battering ram of a person. Hélène glided over, her smile a thin, sharp line. "Good evening," she said, her tone polished to a high, impenetrable sheen. "I do apologize, but I'm afraid we are fully committed this evening. Reservations are typically required weeks in advance." It was a lie, and they both knew it. There were at least 3 empty tables for 2, and a small single top near the bar. The biker looked past her, his gaze sweeping over the empty tables. He didn't point them out. He simply met her eyes. "I can wait," he said, his patience a stark contrast to the simmering hostility around him. "That won't be possible," Hélène said, her voice dropping slightly, losing its feigned hospitality and gaining an edge of steel. "Furthermore, we do have a dress code." She gestured vaguely at his vest. "We strive to maintain a certain ambiance." The message was clear. "You are not welcome here. You are ruining the picture." The man held her gaze for a long moment. There was no flicker of anger, no hint of insult. There was only a quiet, profound stillness, as if he were observing a specimen under glass. He gave a slow, deliberate nod. "I understand," he said. He turned without another word and walked back toward the door. The collective sigh of relief from the other patrons was audible. The man in the suit chuckled quietly to his companion. Finally, some people have no sense of place. Hélène watched him go, a triumphant little smile playing on her lips. She had protected the sanctity of her establishment. She had excised the foreign element. She smoothed her dress and turned back to her clientele, her perfect evening restored. The biker, whose name was Ridge, pushed the heavy door open and stepped back into the night. The growl of his motorcycle, a custom-built machine that was both beast and art, was a comforting sound. He swung a leg over the saddle, the leather creaking. He didn't start the engine. He just sat there for a moment, looking up at the elegant three-story brick building that housed L'Etoile on its ground floor. He knew the building well. He knew the age of the mortar, the type of steel used in its frame, and the exact date the last seismic retrofitting was completed. He knew these things because 3 years ago, he had signed the deed that made the entire property his. Hélène Dubois' lease renewal was, in fact, sitting on his desk, waiting for a signature that was now far from guaranteed. He reached into his vest, but not for a phone to call his property manager. He was simply retrieving his riding gloves. The business with the lease could wait. It was a cold, impersonal matter. What had just happened was a small, human failure, and he had seen enough of those to know they weren't worth his anger. He was about to start the engine when a sound reached him, a sound that cut through the city noise and the thick oak of the restaurant door. It wasn't loud, but it was deeply, fundamentally wrong. It was a sharp, percussive crack, like a giant bone snapping, followed by a low, grinding groan from the very heart of the building. It was a sound he knew intimately from a former life, a sound that signaled the failure of materials under immense stress. Inside L'Etoile, a fine shower of white dust rained down upon the table of the man in the tailored suit, powdering the sleeve of his jacket. A jagged spiderweb crack had appeared in the ornate plaster of the ceiling, originating from a massive support pillar in the center of the room. A collective gasp went through the diners. Hélène froze. It's just the upstairs tenants, she announced, her voice a little too high, a little too shaky. Please, everyone, remain calm. But then, the groan came again, deeper this time, accompanied by a visible shifting of the floor. A wine glass on a nearby table rattled, then tipped over, spilling a Rorschach blot of dark red across the white linen. Panic, cold and sharp, began to ripple through the room. Hélène's composure shattered. "Everyone out! Everyone get out!" she shrieked, her conductor's control lost to primal fear. The patrons surged toward the single entrance, a bottleneck of terror and confusion. The man in the suit pushed past the woman with the pearls, his chivalry forgotten. The heavy oak door was thrust open from the outside. Ridge stood there, framed in the doorway, his face no longer placid. It was a mask of intense, focused concentration. The patrons trying to flee pushed past him, but he stood his ground like a boulder in a river. He wasn't looking at the people. He was looking at the ceiling. "Get back!" Hélène screamed at him. "The building is collapsing." Ridge ignored her. He walked back into the dining room, moving against the tide of fleeing people. His steps were measured, his eyes scanning the new geography of cracks in the ceiling. He walked directly to the compromised pillar and laid a hand flat against it, closing his eyes as if listening to a secret. "What are you doing? Are you insane?" Hélène cried, grabbing his arm. He opened his eyes and looked at her, and for the first time, she saw the sheer, unadulterated intelligence burning there. It was the look of a man who saw a complex problem and was already 10 steps into solving it. "That pillar is about to fail," he said, his voice a calm, authoritative command that cut through the rising panic. "The post-tensioning cable anchor in the slab above has likely sheared off. This entire bay is unstable. Shouting and running for the front door is going to get people killed in the stampede." Hélène stared at him, the technical jargon flying past her. "What? Who are you?" "Get on the phone to 911, he ordered, his attention already back on the building. "Tell them you have a potential progressive structural collapse at this address. Tell them to dispatch heavy rescue and a structural engineer. Now." He pointed to a section of the restaurant to the far left. "That side of the building is supported by the exterior wall. It's safer. Get everyone who is still in here over there, away from the center. Move. The certainty in his voice was absolute. It was the voice of a commander on a battlefield, a voice that demanded and received obedience. Helene, dumbfounded, found herself nodding and pulling out her phone, relaying his exact words to the dispatcher. Ridge turned his attention to the staff, who were huddled by the kitchen doors. "You," he said, pointing to a young busboy. "Do you know where the main gas shutoff for the kitchen is?" The boy shook his head, eyes wide with fear. "Of course you don't," Ridge muttered to himself. He strode toward the kitchen as if he'd worked there his whole life, disappearing through the swinging doors. A moment later, he was back. Gas is off. Less chance of a secondary explosion. He scanned the remaining half-dozen patrons, frozen in fear. "I said move," he roared, and this time they scrambled toward the far wall he had indicated. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Ridge was a whirlwind of calm, efficient action. He directed 2 waiters to check the restrooms. He found a fire extinguisher and positioned it near the main electrical panel, which he knew was behind a discreet wall covering near the bar. He saw everything, not as a customer, but as someone deconstructing a crisis into a series of manageable tasks. The first fire engine screamed to a halt outside. A grizzled fire captain, a man named Miller, stormed in, his face set and serious. He saw the panicked civilians, Helene on the phone, and the giant tattooed biker standing in the middle of the room as if he owned the place. "All right, who's in charge?" Miller barked. "He is," Helene said, pointing a trembling finger at Ridge. Miller's eyes narrowed with skepticism. "Sir, I need you to evacuate with the rest of the civilians." Ridge didn't even look at him. "Captain, the failure is in the post-tension slab second floor. Sounds like a tendon anchor let go. You can see the shear cone cracking radiating from the column head. If that pillar goes, it's going to pancake this floor and compromise the one above it." He pointed. "Your primary collapse zone is a 20-foot radius around this pillar. Your secondary risk is the adjoining bays. The west wall is your safest anchor point for now." Captain Miller stopped dead. He stared at Ridge, taking in the leather, the patches, the beard, and then processing the words he had just heard. It was the precise, condensed language of a structural engineer. It wasn't a guess. It was a diagnosis. "Who the hell are you?" Miller asked, his tone shifting from dismissive to respectful. "Doesn't matter," Ridge said. "You need to shore up that pillar, and you need to do it 10 minutes ago. Get your people out of the direct fall line until you have cribbing in place." He then pointed to a spot on the far wall. "The building plans are rolled in a tube in the utility closet behind that wall panel. I've seen them." Miller didn't question it. He barked orders into his radio, his team swarming into the building with a new, focused urgency, following the invisible map the biker had just given them. They moved with the confidence of men who had been given good intel. For the next hour, Ridge became a quiet, indispensable part of the operation. He didn't interfere, but he observed. And when Miller had a question, he had an answer. He pointed out the location of a water main. He suggested the best load-bearing points in the basement for their hydraulic jacks. He moved with a quiet, powerful grace, a man completely in his element. Helene and the few remaining staff watched from the safe zone, their earlier judgment of him melting away into sheer, unadulterated awe. The man they had thrown out for not meeting their dress code was now directing the fire captain on how to save their building. The man in the suit, who had mocked him, had been one of the first to flee, leaving his date behind. This man, this biker, had walked back into the danger. Finally, with timbers and hydraulic shores buttressing the failing pillar, Captain Miller wiped a sleeve across his dusty forehead and walked over to Ridge. The immediate crisis was over. The building was stable for now. I don't know who you are, mister, but you saved my team a lot of guesswork and you probably saved this building. More than that, you kept those people from panicking and trampling each other to death. You saved lives tonight. I was a combat engineer with the Army Corps. You talk like one of us.